It was a 7-year-old boy who asked me if Jesus Christ was my Lord and Savior. I was in my 20s, and we were in a campground in Poland. He was the son of American Protestant missionaries who'd apparently come to bring the gospel of Jesus Christ to the Catholics of Poland. I don't understand that either. Poland has one of the highest church-going rates, over 90% church-going in Poland, and mostly Catholics. And yet, there we were. And one morning, as I was coming out of the public bathrooms in the campground, when this charming little boy asked me if I spoke English. Pretty soon, he was asking me if I believed in Jesus. I tried to avoid the question by saying, "Sure, I believe Jesus existed." But he was too smart for that. He quickly cornered me with, have you actually said Jesus Christ is my Lord and Savior? Not wanting to tell a lie, I admitted no, I had not. Then he said, well, it's easy, I can show you how. Do you want to do it right now, he asked. And when I said, no thank you, he became more aggressive and clearly more concerned. I felt bad disappointing this little guy. But I had just spent 4 years in Asia, and at that point in my life, I was steeped in Buddhism and Hinduism, and I could not stand people who tried to proselytize for Jesus. I found it irritating that this boy left this conversation assuming that because I had not accepted his offer to accept Jesus Christ, that I was wallowing in darkness. When at that very moment, I was very religious, and I felt a strong connection to God and spirit, albeit from an Eastern religious perspective. In my 20s, I thought such Christians were probably the most arrogant, misguided, insulting people on the planet, not to mention annoying. I walked away feeling concerned that this adorable young boy had been brainwashed by his parents and was being used to convert people. I don't think it would be exaggerating to say that I had a big old chip on my shoulder about Jesus and Christians. And the very idea that someone can say a few words and that would determine if they were saved or not was the most preposterous idea I could imagine. Now, since then, I've learned some important things. For one, I've learned that being able to say certain words can, in fact, save a person's life and even save a person's soul. In a minute, I plan to tell you some of those words. But first, I want to acknowledge how hard it is sometimes in a church this diverse and inclusive to find the right words. Here at All Souls, we have everything from atheists, agnostics, and humanists to Christians, Buddhists, Baptists, and Baha'i. We have Jews and Sufis and Quakers and every kind of religious refugee and spiritual seeker. We have devoted scientists and committed naturalists. One time I mentioned naturalists, and someone came up to me and asked if that meant people who walk around with no clothes on. I said, no, those are nudists. And it's possible that we have some of them here as well. Please don't raise your hands, though. I just want to leave that to my imagination. Now, if you're listening by podcast right now, I want to assure you that everyone here is wearing clothes. Now, speaking of our sermon podcast, I just learned that last month there were almost 4,000 downloads of our sermons. Now, do you realize that means that there are now more people who are listening to our sermons on the internet than are actually hearing them here in the church? On Monday, I received an email from another gentleman from Australia who said that he started listening. We've gotten mail from Morocco, Paris, and Japan. We now know of subscribers to the podcast in 5 continents and over a dozen countries. Now, let me just take this opportunity to say that if you are listening to us, we'd love to hear from you. So send us an email or a letter and tell us where you live and who you are. And I'll be sure to let the rest of you know. Now, back to my point. In a congregation this diverse theologically, language can be a stumbling block if we're not careful. Because when we talk about universal truths, we still need to use particular words. And words have a tendency to change their meaning over time and space. I remember going to England when I was a teenager, and I was standing in a line, which they call a queue, and a guy my age looked right at me and asked, "Can I pinch a fag?" I didn't know what to say. It's none of my business. You know? Whatever floats your boat, Do you know what he wanted? Anybody know what he wanted? Yeah, he wanted to borrow a cigarette. That means, can I pinch a fag? That means something a little different here in Oklahoma. Now, another time I was cutting through a line, it was a queue, of course, and I said, "Pardon me," and a guy said, "Sorry, here only the Queen can pardon you." So I learned that I needed to say, "Excuse me," in those situations. Now, the Brits, they love to make fun of American pronunciation too, right? We call our mother's sister our aunt. One Brit says, "Why do you call her your aunt?" Aunt, it sounds so crude. It sounds like a bug. Aunt. Now they say aunt or auntie, which I have to admit does sound a little bit nicer than aunt. My aunt. But I grew up in Chicago, so you've probably noticed my accent. My wife was born in Boston, where they drive a car and drink at a bar and eat pickles from a jar. In Oklahoma, y'all say things like y'all and roots, as in you need to pull up that dandelion by its roots. You don't think that's funny, but I do. You're going, what's wrong with that? It's just normal, right? And you pronounce Miami, Miami, and I never understood that. Pronouncing the names of Oklahoma towns is one of the hardest things for those of us who are not from these parts. My first year in Tulsa, I was delivering a eulogy, and I said that the deceased grew up in Chickasaw. And about 20 people yelled out, "Shakota!" It was a bit startling. There I am in the middle of this poor guy's eulogy, and it feels like I'm being heckled. I told them that I was from Chicago, and they all laughed. It was a little hard to regain the air of sanctity and reverence, but it all worked out. He's still dead. Now, I like how many African Americans say the word ask. They often say axe. Do you ever notice that? It's like what George Washington used to cut down the cherry tree. Now, of course, if some random white dude came up to me and said, "I want to axe you," I would be running the other direction before, we finished the sentence, but it was like Freddy Krueger or something. But if an African American says, "I want to axe you," I say, "Well, axe away." You know what we call this? It's a shibboleth. A shibboleth. That's a word that comes from the Bible, from the Hebrew Scriptures, from the book of Judges. It's from the 12th chapter, when Jephthah and the Gileadites are being attacked by the Ammonites, or the Ephraimites.